The FDA just named Leah Crystal as the Office of New Drugs Acting Director for Biosimilars, a role in which she will coordinate OND's implementations of the new biosimilars approval pathway set by the healthcare reform law. What impact do you expect this will have for the pharma community?
Very important new role. As you know, something we've all been waiting for further clarification. So I do expect for the pharma community, this will hopefully expedite clarity in terms of some of the next steps and the details of the regulation associated with biosimilars. As part of healthcare reform, that law is very general. And so the regulatory next steps are critical. She is seen as being someone who is very aware of kind of the industry, of the details, and of really the concerns related to bioequivalence. So I think it's being viewed very positively. It's breaking news. So it's kind of fresh news that just came out, but overall we're seeing a positive response and certainly an understanding at the leadership level of how different specialty products are from oral solids, which is important.
Let's turn our focus to the schedule cuts in the Medicare physician reimbursement. I understand there are some proposals on the table to address this issue. Can you walk us through what's currently being discussed, at least as of late May, and what effect they will have?
Yeah, I'd like to. This has been a soap opera in the making. So we've had what's often referred to as the doc fix issue, which has been created by a flaw in the Medicare system, referred to as sustainable growth rate, or SGR. And this flaw has been going on actually since 2004, but it's been escalating in terms of its impact, because when you do a temporary fix in the government, you pay for that later. So that means that physicians have had a looming 22% pay cut in all Medicare reimbursement since January 1st of this year, but we've been patching it with temporary fixes. And you'll remember that when we met last time, they were in the midst of this crisis. Following that, they actually made a temporary patch, which is good through the end of May. So we're in that situation right now, and there's a current bill that was introduced just a couple of days ago that has both Senate and House support to create a slightly longer term fix to this issue, a 3-year fix, and it's wrapped up with a whole bunch of things that are frankly more popular. So it's wrapped up with some emergency measures related to people that are unemployed, extending COBRA benefits, supporting people at very low incomes in terms of Medicaid eligibility. So it's put in with a number of emergency provisions that have some momentum. But I'll tell you, this is a very difficult situation that physicians are in, because it's very expensive simply to hold reimbursement for physicians flat. So we're just trying to hold the status quo, and we've had relatively flat reimbursement now for almost a decade for physicians. So it's a fairly critical situation that we're in. And the challenge isn't that everyone doesn't support the change, it's how to pay for it, and because it's costly. So this is a challenging situation, and I don't expect it to go away anytime soon. The best case scenario would be that it's fixed through 2013. That would be the best news we could possibly have, but that would actually create a new cliff on January 1st, 2014 of a 35% pay cut for physicians. So it's one of those kind of deep breath kind of moments that even the best case scenario has some real challenges to it, and it's not clear if there's the Senate votes to even support that type of long-term fix. So we could very well end up in yet another temporary stopgap provision. My hope, to be honest with you, is that we do pass something and don't go into these very short band-aids where we're holding claims, because that's obviously very stressful for physician practices across the country.
There has been congressional discussion about expanding the 340B drug discount program to inpatient drugs for use by patients who lack prescription drug coverage. Can you discuss what impact this might have and why it is yet another key issue for pharma manufacturers to keep their eyes on?
Yeah, this is another big one of potentially breaking news. So within healthcare reform, 340B was not expanded to include the inpatient side, but was expanded to include some other freestanding type outpatient centers, like I had mentioned previously. Just this past week, we've seen some movement related to adding in another provision to actually include inpatient access to 340B pricing. But it has an important nuance to it, and therefore actually has the support currently of the pharmaceutical industry, which is surprising, because obviously these are tremendous discounts. But that nuance is that those discounts could only be used for uninsured patients. And that's a big change. Currently, the 340B program is utilized by eligible facilities, so those disproportionately serving the underinsured, but then they use that low pricing and use it for all of their patients. This change would begin to set up a very different element in terms of compliance, which would be a sea change. So this inpatient piece is definitely one to watch. It could end up being attached with that Medicare physician doc fix issue we were just discussing. So it might be wrapped up into that. And right now it looks like it actually saves a little bit of money, not giant, because again, it's expected to only impact a very limited number of patients at eligible facilities. So a very important one for pharmaceutical companies to watch, because maybe it will change how 340B pricing is used so that it's narrowed actually to be for appropriate patient populations rather than widespread use across eligible entities. So it's a big one.
Okay, so earlier this month, WellPoint became the first benefits company to release guidelines for the submission and evaluation of comparative effectiveness research that it plans to use in reviewing drugs for its formulary. What should manufacturers take from that announcement? Is it a harbinger for sweeping change across managed care, or is it just a toe dipped in the water for what will become a gradual process?
This is big news, and some people might have missed kind of why it's big. The big part is the transparency. So although WellPoint announced a couple years ago this new process, they hadn't said that they would put the details of their process out into the public domain. So this week's announcement really is a big change in terms of putting that information out for other payers to be able to utilize and for pharmaceutical companies to be able to understand the kind of guidance they would like to see, particularly in terms of more outcomes data. I think it really takes the bar to the next level in terms of manufacturers needing real-world outcomes data. And as you know, this is something near and dear to our consulting group, an area that we are very focused on. But instead of that being a nice to have, I think this does move the bar to being something you really have to have moving forward. When I was with some of our managed care experts at an MCN meeting just a few days ago, I asked them what they thought about this change. And 82% of that audience said that they believed other payers would follow suit based on WellPoint's announcement. Wow. So pretty significant in terms of what manufacturers need to consider be well beyond FDA approval type data on their products.
Well, back to health reform for our final question. Payers, particularly private payers, seem to be quite at odds with the changes taking place. From what you've seen, how will this impact things like formulary and coverage decisions?
Yeah, it's a tough one to tell. We know that payers are going to have a negative impact from those Medicare Advantage cuts that we talked about. But they also could be one of the bigger winners of healthcare reform, particularly if it's not through a public option. So very important for them are patients being able to get private insurance through those clearinghouses versus or exchanges versus actually going just only onto Medicaid rolls. Another, though, win potentially for a lot of payers will be Medicaid managed care. So if states, because of their own budget crisis, are really moving towards Medicaid managed care versus traditional Medicaid as a way to save money, the players in that space are those same payers. So while they're wringing their hands at the moment because of the Medicare Advantage cuts, which I know are significant, the reality is there are a lot of spots where payers can win, and they'll have some more tools in their tool chest, if you will, in terms of managing formulary type issues. So they will be able to be more aggressive in terms of true managed care. So it'll be interesting to watch how those pieces come together, but when you combine it with WellPoint's announcement this week, it does seem like they're prepared to move to the next level in terms of how they manage benefits.
Along those lines, should we expect even greater changes in the areas where cost of care is substantial, like oncology?
That's the big controversial one. In healthcare reform, very careful language that cost would not be a consideration in terms of coverage or reimbursement. But the reality is we are beginning to see that on the private side. So I think we all need to be able to understand the cost and outcomes or value perspective of all of our treatment regimens when we look into the more distant future.
Peyton, as always, great insight. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us what you know and what we can learn about healthcare reform.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back soon with another all-new webisode. Until then, if it's on your mind, it's in the know.